Jesus responds to the lawyer with this parable that's familiar to most. It's one of the few teachings of Jesus that have made their way into popular culture. A man helps another who's been robbed and beaten. He provides for him, has compassion on him, is a vehicle of God's love for him. It's a great story which Jesus finishes off with a great line, "Go and do likewise." This is a parable I want to hear. It's a good morality tale, a lesson for us to take home and use in our daily lives. Who is my neighbor? Who should I care for? Anyone in need. Anyone you come upon in need is your neighbor. It's not an easy lesson, but it makes sense. Except, it isn't exactly the parable Jesus tells. It's close, really close. But there's this one detail, this one word which messes the whole thing up. Samaritan. Here's the 1-minute history of Samaritans. You may recall from our readings through the Old Testament last fall that God's people, the Israelites, came into the Promised Land and formed a kingdom. You had King Saul, then David, then Solomon, but then the kingdom split in two. In the north, Samaria was the capital and center of the faith. In the south, it was Jerusalem. A couple hundred years after David, the northern kingdom was conquered by Assyria. A couple hundred years after that, the southern kingdom fell to Babylon. To varying degrees, both peoples were able to maintain their identity. In the south, they became Jews, and in the north, Samaritans. And they were enemies. They hated each other. They were enemies in the way only those with much in common can be. Samaritans wouldn't have been allowed in the temple, and even eating with or touching one would have been ill-advised. You wouldn't let your daughter bring a Samaritan home for dinner, and the disdain was mutual. This is the parable of the Good Samaritan, and that messes everything up. The man who shows mercy, the man we are called to see as our model for Christian behavior, is the enemy. He's unclean, unwelcome, untrustworthy, and he's the good one. The Samaritan shows mercy. It messes it all up. I mean, the morality lesson is still there, I suppose. You can still think of the Good Samaritan as a model, as an example for how to live in this world. But the world is different now. Mercy's gone and messed it all up. Because we have a system, see? A system that is built with categories of people. You've got the people in the world who are contributors, the hard workers and innovators and leaders and scientists and teachers, the folks who make the world a better place, who advance society and pay lots of taxes. Then you've got your do-gooders, the folks who might not have a career that adds much to the GDP, but they make the world better through kindness. Of course, you've also got your ne'er-do-wells, your criminals, your terrorists, your bullies, your high-priced bankers using obscure securities to make a mint off people failing. Finally, you've got your dependents, the folks who can't make it on their own, some because of choice, perhaps, leeches, they're called derisively, and others because of their own situations, the sick and injured, the victims, the ones we pity. We've got these categories, see, categories of people. You might label them differently, but we've all got categories. And the lawyer wants to know, we want to know, which categories are neighbors. But when Jesus makes the merciful one a Samaritan, then it's like we don't even have categories anymore. If an enemy becomes a contributor or a leech becomes a do-gooder, then mercy is breaking down the neat lines distinguishing between categories, even between the basic two categories of giver and receiver. And all of a sudden, we just have this big group called neighbors.